All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another live chat here on DW Africa. As always, I'm your host, Josie Mahachi. Now, today we're going to be talking about a very serious situation, the crisis that is happening in Sudan. As you're all aware, millions of Sudanese people have been trapped in their homes since violence erupted over 4 days ago between two rival forces, and civilians have been killed and over 1,400 wounded. But the real number is likely higher. Now, joining me for this particular discussion is Haga Ali, a doctoral researcher at the University of Hamburg, and journalist Patrick Oyet. We are going to be discussing about this particular discussion. Let me just add them to the live stream. There is Haga Ali. Haga, how are you doing? And thank you so much for joining us here on DW Africa.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. And we also have Patrick Oyet. Patrick, how are you?
I am good. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Now, I don't know if you guys need a few seconds just to share the live stream so that we can have more people listening to us. And this is a very important discussion.
All right, so I shared this to my Facebook feed.
No worries.
I did as well.
Okay, thank you so much, guys. Now, let's just dig right into the discussion. Haga, I will start with you. What exactly went wrong and what is the root cause of this crisis in Sudan?
So to really grasp the root causes, we kind of need to go back to the actual military coup in 2021, or rather specifically where it happened. So at the point in time when the military coup happened in October 2021, it wasn't just that it interrupted Sudanese democratization, but that it happened at a point in time when institutions were still undergoing a very fundamental change and redoing process. So to close with Omar Bashir's legacy, a lot of these institutions and course of apartheid and political parties had to be undone in order to start off with a clean slate. And Sudan at that point in time was at the stage where it had undone especially the ruling party and the parliament as it was set up before. And it was just about heading towards forming a new cabinet, forming a new parliament, and setting the new rules of the game to prepare for the elections and to prepare for a constitutional convention and a new constitution. And in this very volatile particular stage, that's when the army stepped in and canceled negotiations between civilians and the military administration back then over a foreseeable loss of military authority at that point in time.
So, sorry, before I go to Patrick Haga, what was the relationship like between Omar al-Bashir and the generals at that time?
So at that time, the generals entered into an alliance just for the purpose of ousting them. So they haven't really been close allies from the beginning. There were rifts visible early on in the process, though nothing to the extent that we see now.
And Patrick, do you agree with Haga's points when it comes to the root cause? What exactly is the root cause of this crisis in Sudan?
Yeah, I agree with Haga, and I think I can go even further, previous or before the 2021 issue, because if you look at how former President Omar al-Bashir has been running or had been running Sudan, you find that he created armed groups, and these armed groups, some of them were allied to his government, and he was basically setting up, a group against a group in different regions of the country, including where I am in South Sudan here, where you find, people are armed. These are militias who are fighting a certain group within a territory, and this is where the rapid support forces actually come from. So these problems are there. And if it were not the rapid support forces, it would have also been maybe another group, because there are still so many armed groups in the Sudan. And the problem is coming from a security sector reform. There is supposed to be a robust security sector reform. And these are some of the examples of the challenges that the Sudanese are going to face when they want really to reform the security sector. And that is because so many people are armed, so many armed groups, light weapons are in the hands of so many people. So it's a very, very difficult process when it comes to issue of security sector reforms. And yet it has to be done. If really the Sudanese people want to move to a democratic process, then these security sector reforms have to be done.
Okay, we have a lot of our we have a lot of our followers here that really want to understand the crisis in Sudan. So what was the idea behind creating this paramilitary in the first place?
I don't know if you want me to answer that or Haga should answer that.
I mean, I'm just throwing the questions in and anybody can answer, or both.
I can give Haga. Haga, go ahead.
The addition I wanted to make earlier to Patrick to also contextualize it is that the security reform and also integrating the rapid support forces into the military, they are as important as they are because the other branches of government aren't functioning at this point in time. So to even get there to a point in which you can rebuild these, you really have to go through these integrational processes through securing some sort of monopolization in the security sector in the course of apparatus of the state. So that was the addition that I just wanted to make.
Okay, and in terms of
Yeah.
paramilitary.
Okay, like the in terms of paramilitary groups, like I said before, former President Omar al-Bashir had a lot of people rising against his government in different parts of the country, in the western part of Sudan, in the southern part of Sudan, in the Blue Nile, in Nuba Mountains, and so forth. And it became very difficult for the Sudan armed forces or the conventional army to really, tackle all these rebellions. So what he would do is that he would get groups and in most cases use money to give their leaders a lot of money. They get some basic military training, and they would therefore be used. They would fight basically on the side of the government. And sometimes they were also responsible for, human rights violations, grave human rights violations. They did not respect the international humanitarian law. They did not respect schools. They did not respect hospitals. They were just attacking civilians. So these were some of the groups that were not really properly trained. They did not know the law of war. They were being used just to basically keep former President Omar al-Bashir in power. And now some of them have become actually very powerful, like, for example, the Rapid Support Forces. So basically, that is the origin of most of these groups.
Okay, but then when we look at everything that is happening in Sudan right now between the army and the paramilitary, do you think they have the civilians' interest at heart? Because at the end of the day, they say when the elephants fight, it's the grass that suffer. Do you really think they do have the civilians' interest at heart?
I wouldn't say.
To me, I would say that, I'm sorry, Haga, I would say that now that some of them or all of them have actually tested power, and they know some rules and some laws, they are saying yes, they are fighting for the civilians, but in actual sense they are fighting actually for themselves. They are fighting for themselves. They're only using what they know to say yes, we are for civilians. They only want civilians as people they are going to rule, because you need to be in power to rule some group of people. So they are only using civilians to that extent. But the fighting is basically over who should control. Is about power, Haga.
Exactly. It's not in the interest of civilians. However, civilian interests may on occasion align depending on what political goals are. And that really is the thing that has shifted a lot. So in the beginning of the transitory process, it was in the interest of everyone to reestablish a new regime, to make a clean cut Omar al-Bashir. But then when it came to the issue of finding a new place for the military and subjugating it under civilian control, there was a conflict of interest with regards to the commercial enterprises of the army. And that's when it went apart. But now the situation has shifted again, where we're at a point in which no one really benefits from this current clash. No one benefits from the instability that there is at the point in time. And there's also no way forward. There's no way back. There are no institutions, no platforms that can mitigate or adjudicate these kinds of discords between now the top two leaders, and not knowing in which way to go, whether you can go back and you may go forth. Democratization might potentially be back on the table because it can exit the stalemate without too much loss of control. There can still be a top-down reform process where the armed forces or the rapid support forces can exert considerable influence. But it is something that can be leveraged more. So yeah, that is the current situation. The important thing is
I totally agree with Haga here, because what the military are trying to do on both sides anyway, they are trying to make sure that they continue to be relevant in the Sudanese politics, because now
So
the
no
only
hope for
thing you hear
civilian rule.
members.
So no hope for civilian rule in Sudan.
Exactly. Because they now know that the only thing the East African region is talking about, the international community members are talking about, is that let there be a negotiation, let there be settlement in a peaceful way through dialogue. So they know that they are going to play a role still in the government, and that's what really they want. They still they are not ready to hand over power to the civilians, and that's really the challenge. And
Okay,
somehow they have to be there.
Exactly.
Speaking
And
of,
looking past these specific clashes, it doesn't matter who wins these clashes. They still need to govern the people. And even in a military regime, even in an autocratic setting, they still need to gain the support from people. They still need to gain loyalty. And that also means that they need to concede to some demands from civilian democratizer in order to move forward and exit whatever the stalemate is at the point in time.
Okay, now Haga, you actually bring a very good and important point there. So now when we look at the paramilitary and the army, who between the two do you see maybe getting that mantle to lead Sudan?
I think the problem is that neither of them really can. So what we've seen since the coup is because there are no functioning there's not a functioning parliament. There's a bare bones constitution, a very dysfunctional judiciary system. So the two main branches of governments don't exist. You only could rule and had to rule by brute force and relying on a very strong executive. But that wasn't the case. There were internal rifts, especially with now a second center of gravity with the rapid support forces in the executive now. So both of them were not strong enough and not capable enough to govern. And they had to do multiple things at the same time. Sudan's economic crisis put them on the clock from the start, actually, to act, to kind of gain support, regain control over the situation, to mitigate whatever effects the sanctions had in response to the coup back then, while keeping a lid on the resistance that was spreading throughout the country, while trying to prepare for the elections, while trying to rebuild a political party. So they were very stretched thin and had very little room to maneuver, but were under pressure to act, to do something. So that's the point of departure for them both. So both of them together, not strong enough, weak and volatile in governance, and both of them separate, each on their own, will also not be strong enough to undertake all of these tasks while keeping the rival at bay, while also potentially keeping a renewed democratic push under lid that is seizing on the opportunity because there is a split. So that's what I mean by stalemate. They can do together, but they also can do separate.
Exactly. So if we are to assume and hope that maybe a truce, maybe, I don't know what is going to happen, but if they come together, I mean, there is the leader of the paramilitary, there is the leader of the army. That is where the issue is. Who then do you foresee maybe leading Sudan if they are ever going to maybe come back together?
Yeah, there is a possibility of a status quo being maintained, meaning if there's a negotiated settlement. This is only opinion, of course, it can vary, but there is a possibility of the status quo being maintained. Al Burhan being the head, General Hemeti being the deputy. That is very much possible if they go for negotiation. Sometimes people fight because they just want to maintain their position. Because look, we all now know the issue of the disagreement where, for example, Al Burhan is suggesting integration of the forces to be, that is the rapid support forces, to be in 2 years' time, whereas General Hemeti wants it to be 10 years. Basically, what he is fearing is that if at all his forces are integrated into the Sudan armed forces within 2 years, then he would not have anybody supporting him in terms of who has brought him to power. What has brought him to power are the forces, and if the forces are removed away from him within 2 years, then if he is removed from a position, he doesn't have any fallback position. So he wants to maintain the forces under him, to use it to maintain a certain position in the government. So if at all a negotiated settlement is going to be reached, he would not really refuse to still be the second in command.
All right, let's talk about East. Yeah, you want to add something, Haga?
Yeah, I would add
Okay.
absolutely, that is absolutely correct. They're currently both in an incredibly unsustainable position. Something has to change, something has to shift. And what I also find very difficult about making prognosis about this is because this problem and the integration of the rapid support forces into the army is inevitable, and it would have come up regardless in which direction Sudan would have headed. So if it were to return by chance to a civilian democracy, the problem of having a very strong paramilitary force in the country, in addition to the army, would be that it can still overturn electoral results. It can still overturn decision making. It can still push ethno-religious divisions in the periphery deeper, because that has been also the nature of the recruitment to the rapid support forces. And even from an authoritarian standpoint, if you were to continue down this path towards a military-based autocracy, the rapid support forces, in terms of troop size and equipment, may not be as strong as the regular army, but they're still strong enough to pose a very serious threat to whoever will be in charge back then. It will still be a very serious coup risk that needs to be eliminated at that time. And by integrating both of them into each other, you eliminate that risk of potentially canceling democratic decision-making or coup risks, without also losing the equipment, the personnel, and the troop strength that comes with the rapid support forces. And I think part of why this is such a contentious decision is because Dagalo also realizes that by integrating, he's losing a lot of this leverage that comes with the rapid support forces, and that this may be a ploy to eliminate coup risk in the future.
And Kenya's President William Ruto has a role to play. Do you see him as the best person, I mean, to obviously bring the two parties together and try and discuss for peace to reign in Sudan? Do you think William Ruto is the right man to do that?
Haga, maybe go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. I would have said Haga. Okay, Haga, go ahead. Yeah.
It was thrown between us. I mean, the process of reconciling after the war, after the civil war in 2005, also happened with external parties, where with the comprehensive peace agreement in 2005, other parties, external parties, helped negotiate some sort of transition and exit out of this state, and this could very well be a way out of the situation. I'm not an expert on Kenyan politics, but in the previous peace processes around the Comprehensive Peace Agreement and the Juba Agreement, external parties helped facilitate creating positions and creating the rules of the game to negotiate towards a new system, and ensuring that the political groups that have been neglected and disenfranchised under the current regime and also in the current status quo may get a chance to get back to the political table and get their foot back into the door. So yeah,
Patrick?
very evasive answer.
Yeah,
to
yes, I think, I think that the Intergovernmental Authority on Development region could really help because of the kind of understanding of the situation in Sudan. For example, President Salva Kiir of South Sudan is a military man as well. They've been in the same government when Sudan was still one. They have worked together somehow. They know each other. Ruto has also been in the government for long. Even in 2005, when this comprehensive peace agreement was being actually negotiated and signed, he was already in government in as much as he was not
But
holding
there
a
are
very
some
senior
reports,
position.
Patrick, there are
But
some reports that
he,
Ruto might have personal interest in this. True or false?
I cannot rule out that, but basically the relations between nations are based on personal interest and sometimes in the interest of the states as well. Without any interest, nobody would really, come to help you. So that cannot be ruled out. But even South Sudan, if they are involved, they're involved because of some interest. They have their oil which goes through Sudan. If Djibouti is involved, they are involved because of some interest. So definitely interests are there. But now the most important thing is to put the interests of the Sudanese people who are suffering first, to end the violence which is ongoing, so that if you have your interest, it can always be negotiated later. So I think, yes, the region has a role. The Kenyan president has a role to play. However, the challenge is that the parties that are currently conflicting may not really listen to them much because they don't have much leverage, like, for example, the US or the UK or the big powers, for example. Because if you ask yourself, what does Kenya give to Sudan? What does South Sudan give to Uganda? To Sudan? You will find that it's not compared to the other big powers. So it needs the big powers. If at all the regional powers in the East African region are going to try to help, it needs the backing of the big powers so that the parties can be pushed to come to a negotiation table.
And Haga, you've been researching, I'm sure, for years on such situations. I mean, then what do you foresee happening, in Sudan from now on? What should people expect, especially the civilians? I mean, millions are stuck there inside their homes. Nobody knows if they have enough food. Nobody knows if, obviously people need to go out, but it's not safe. Lives are being lost in Sudan. What do you see happening moving forward?
Yeah. So first of all, of course, I'm rooting for the people of Sudan on the ground right now, as we're discussing this, from a safe distance right now. But research shows that exit from these kinds of situations are incredibly difficult. However, there have been cases in history where civilians could exploit divisions and rifts between the armed forces. And the armed forces right now, they're in a very different positions than they were when they took over in 2021. Now, civilians have a lot more leverage because it is known, there is proof now that Al-Burhan and Dagalo together can't rule, that they failed in ruling. They can't claim legitimacy for their position anymore because they weren't able to govern. Electoral victory to legitimize the coup in retrospective is also not possible anymore because they need a party that is like Omar al-Bashir's National Congress Party, and that takes years to build. And because it's been dissolved, they can't just use these prefabricated structures to move forward. So to put a positive spin on this is really the time to regroup and reconsider stepping back into the political arena because, again, neither Dagalo nor Al-Burhan can continue on their own. So that's very unprecedented leverage that civilians and the Forces for Freedom of Change have in Sudan in comparison to maybe even 2019 or the coup, or maybe ever. There's a lot that needs to be done. And again, because whoever prevails from this conflict, they still need to govern. They still need to gain people's loyalties. And the longer it goes on, the more they also risk mass defections from the army. Because at the end of the day, those that are sent out to fight in the streets, those aren't the richer, the wealthy top generals. It's the soldiers, the recruits, the conscripts that in many cases also share and suffer under the same economic and socioeconomic grievances that the people of Sudan already do. And that is something that in Egypt and in Tunisia at the time of the Arab Spring and in the early movements was a big factor, that soldiers who again come from the same backgrounds, who suffer from the same grievances and crises and poverty, had to decide: do they stick with the coercive apparatus, or do they side with the people with whom they have a lot more in common than the top generals in this instance? And it is momentum. It is and a window of opportunity, I think.
Yeah. And Patrick, do you want to
Yeah,
add
I
something?
agree. Yes, I want to add the good thing. One thing with the Sudanese people is that, and one thing that can also be credited to former President Omar al-Bashir, among the many bad things people talk about, is at least that many Sudanese people got education, and the Sudanese people have very professional unions, whether they are doctors, whether they are teachers, and so forth, who have education, the required education, and they can use this opportunity to really come out and later really claim for the position that they really deserve, because as Haga just clearly stated, the military have shown that they are not able to really govern. But then also the other issue is that, you may use the powers of the gun to come to power, but as long as the citizens have rejected your rule, you can do very little. You cannot kill everybody in the country. So yes, the Sudanese people still have a chance, in which chance they can use to really, once this all violence go down, they can now claim the rights that they really want.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
let's
Just because a coup succeeded, it's never a guarantee that whoever succeeded in the coup can actually hold on to the power. And that's something that we now see very, very clearly in Sudan. They may have succeeded, and the alliance between Al-Burhan and Dagalo has taken them so far to succeed in a coup attempt, but everything else since then hasn't worked in their favor.
Okay, now I see the two of you do agree that the military, the army, they have failed in Sudan. So let's assume that there is a civilian government tomorrow. Who do you foresee, I mean, in Sudan, leading this very optimistic, we are being optimistic, the civilian leadership in Sudan? Who do you foresee taking the mantle?
From
Yeah,
what I can
Patrick.
tell.
Okay, Haga, you
Okay,
can start.
Patrick, do you want to try this one?
No, go ahead, go ahead. Go ahead.
So
Yeah.
from what I can tell, the Forces for Freedom of Change, they're currently in a better position to form and to organize and to mobilize into a political party than any other political alliance presently, because the Middle East historically has a huge problem with political parties. Also because historically in Sudan, Sudan doesn't have a very rich history of multi-party politics in which structures and or the political infrastructure for a lot of political parties already exists. So when you would resume the democratization process, it is still preceded by a time period in which the first political parties that will partake in the first elections, that will partake in the constitutional convention, they still need to be formed from scratch. They still need to build their voter base, find their political position, find their electorate, and gain a stronghold. And that's where also the Arab Spring, say in Tunisia, has failed, because this party formation in the first generation of political actors in the democratic system failed because of that long legacy of not having multi-party systems, of having single party rule, or very single party dominant systems that oppressed a lot of political groups and have gone through very great lengths to also prevent civilians from mobilizing and forming political parties. So instability and division was by design to prevent the Sudanese people from political organization, from mobilizing. And that's the legacy that will be the next big challenge if whatever is happening now moves in a democratic direction.
Patrick?
Yeah, if what is happening moves in a democratic direction, definitely there is need to clearly state in whatever protocol agreement or whatever is going to be the working document that the government should move to civilian. That would be very important, because you have a country where you have so many
But led by who,
so-called
Patrick?
parties.
But led
But
by
yeah, that's what I'm.
who?
It has to be led by, for example, the people. I would just agree with Haga, because
Okay.
the forces for freedom are the people who really push so hard, even during the time of former
Mhm.
President Omar al-Bashir. So you do not leave them out. Now, coming to others, because we have so many political parties, but these parties are actually military. You have the Sudan People's Liberation Movement North, an army. You have in the Darfur region so many groups. They will claim, of course, they will say we are also political parties and we want to contest. But I think it would be very important to clearly state that now whoever is going to contest should be purely civilian. So that, I think, would help. Yeah.
Okay, now thank you so much, the two of you, for joining us on this very important discussion. But I won't let you go without at least sending a word or words of encouragement, rather, I don't know, words of consoling to the people of Sudan. Haga?
Yeah, again, leverage. There is unprecedented leverage now, and as dire and bleak as the situation looks like right now, this is a window of opportunity to regroup and get back in the game, in the political game.
Patrick?
Yes, every bad thing comes to an end. It is a bad situation, difficult situation now, but it will definitely come to an end. So the Sudanese people should continue to have hope, and the future will always be bright. There is no really country that can tell you that they have moved smoothly. Everybody has gone through some struggle. Human rights and political rights and so on are not got on a silver plate. You have to work for it, and Sudanese people should be ready to work for this, and eventually they will achieve what they want.
Thank you so much, Patrick Oyet, for joining me here on DW Africa, as well as you, Haga Ali. We appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We were talking about the situation in Sudan right now, and joining me was Haga Ali, a doctoral researcher at the University of Hamburg, and also journalist Patrick Oyet. Until next time, my name is Josie Mahachi. Take care.